Item 1 is apologies for absence and Chairman's announcements. I've had apologies from Assemblymember Berry, for whom Assemblymember Russell has kindly agreed to attend as a substitute. Do we have any other further apologies for absence? Assemblymember O'Connell for lateness.
And Assemblymember Shaw.
And Assemblymember Shaw. Thank you very much. Item 2 is declarations of interests. Can we note the list of offices held by Assembly members? And members are asked to declare any disclosable pecuniary interests in specific items listed on the agenda. And any other relevant interests. Are there any? Thank you, members. I'll take that as no. Item 3 are minutes. Now, before confirming the minutes, the committee should note that some of the percentages displayed on page 3 of the appendix to agenda item 7, which is the workforce report 1718, which we'll consider at the last committee, were incorrect. We found that out in between the two meetings, and a correction can be found in the footnote at the minutes on page 7. So subject to that amendment, can we confirm the minutes of our meeting on the 17th of July to be signed by me as a correct record?
All right.
Thank you very much. Item 4 is the summary list of actions. Can we note the completed and outstanding actions arising from the previous meetings of this committee? Thank you. Item 5, first of our main items of business today. I'd like to welcome the Deputy Mayor for Culture and Creative Industries, Justine Simons, the Interim Director of Communities and Intelligence, Emma Strain, and the Assistant Director of Culture and Creative Industries, Shona Manson. Have I pronounced that correctly this time? Good. Thank you for attending. Now, for members, to refresh memories, we had this item before us at the last meeting. Members had some concerns around it, so it's been taken away. It's been amended to a degree, and the Deputy Mayor has agreed to attend today. So, Deputy Mayor, do you have some opening remarks?
I do, yeah. First of all, thank you very much for the invitation. I really welcome the opportunity to discuss the proposed culture team staffing plans with the committee. What I want to do is just make a very short statement just to outline the vision and ambition for culture, which will set out the rationale for the culture team. But before I started, I just wanted to begin by reassuring the committee that the officers have taken on board the feedback from the recent Oversight Committee about aligning the proposed restructure with the GLA's budget setting process. So following my statement, Emma and Shona are here to answer any questions about the proposal that you've now received, which is, in summary, to stabilise the existing team and not increase the headcount. So just to set a bit of context, why is culture so important to us? Well, culture brings in massive benefits to the economy. It's the driver for tourism, it generates jobs, and it's the key ingredient in regeneration. But of course, it's much more than this. It brings communities together, and it's, of course, a powerful tool to engage young people, especially those in need of an alternative path. I wanted to share a quote from a young woman who had done some art classes in prison. She said, "The thing about art is it allows you to think differently, so you behave differently, so you get different results. To me, that is the definition of rehabilitation." So as well as being a world-class cultural capital, there's much potential for Londoners' lives to be enriched by culture. But of course, London has its challenges. Infrastructure is collapsing, talent is draining, and not enough Londoners are making the most of the culture we have here on offer in this city. And over recent months, there's been a spike in youth violence. But the good news is, Sadiq has made culture a core priority. We have the most ambitious culture strategy ever produced by City Hall, and we know for sure that culture can offer an alternative path to young people and help them to make positive life choices. The cross-policy potential is huge across environment, regeneration, health, and the creative economy is growing fast with big job opportunities on the horizon. So that's a few words about the context. Now I wanted to say a few words about the culture team. To make the most of all this potential I've just outlined, we need brilliant people. And luckily we have brilliant people in the culture team. So I just wanted you to know how important it is to me that they receive the support they deserve. And I can say hand on heart that the level of talent and commitment of the culture officers at City Hall is genuinely unparalleled in government. For everyone in the team, it's not just a job, it's a purpose. They all care at a deep and personal level about the positive contribution culture can make to London and to the lives of Londoners. They work supremely hard, many late nights and weekends, You'll see them helping young musicians with their kit for the annual gigs competition. You'll see them going the extra mile to save pubs and small music venues, staff with an accurate job description on a permanent contract, and that's our new director, Shona. Everyone else is either a temp on a fixed-term contract that's about to run out or is acting up into a more senior role as the work has grown in scale and ambition. So we really need to address this and provide some stability for the officers. Now, I'm sure what you're thinking is, how have we ended up here? Well, when Sadiq was elected, we immediately did put in place temporary arrangements to address this capacity issue very quickly. Then we appointed our new director, Shona Manson, and then we wrote the new culture strategy. So there's a logic to the staff proposal coming after the director has been appointed and the strategy written. And Shona put a proposal together to deliver this, which, as I said, will now be considered as part of the GLA's budget setting process. But the temporary arrangement we had has run its course. We are at risk of losing the great talent in the team, so we do need to stabilise the unit. Now, this stabilisation proposal is not without consequences. A number of programmes have been given new timetables, and Shona will take you through the detail of that. But I just wanted to express today that my priority is really the people in the team. I hope you'll agree with me that we have a duty of care to the culture team. We need to ensure that they have job security and are paid appropriately for the level of work they're delivering and for the benefits of London and Londoners. And we, the GLA as a whole, need to demonstrate our support for these committed and talented officers. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. Any member got any questions you would like to ask at this stage?
No, it's just about the... can we just get on record the timeline you're talking about? So you're saying we're talking about from 20... what?
Do you mean
16.
Do you mean in terms of the restructure? Or?
In terms of the stuff that you've outlined, because you basically said you've only had 30% full-time staff?
Permanent, yeah.
Permanent staff.
Yeah.
So if we said 2016,
yeah.
New World.
Yes.
What was the establishment when you became deputy mayor? That's what I'm not clear of.
Was it about 9? Yeah. 8 or 9, I think it was. Permanent posts.
I think
Yes.
that's remained consistent.
Historically, though, there's always been a higher number of fixed term and contract type posts within the culture team in both the previous administration and the current one than there is in other teams. Yeah.
Right. It was around about 18 to 19 full-time equivalents if you took into account freelance and contract roles at that point, at the administration change.
Yeah. It's because I'm familiar with some of the work that you do, and it just seems to me that you've been able to perform at an extraordinary level with your staff 2016 and beyond and before that. So it's just that I'm not clear about this imperative that you're giving us in terms of this need to change everything, that everything's going to suddenly change because of this new approach that you want to take.
I think Emma can talk to this too, but I think what has happened is, the workload has grown and grown and grown and grown and grown, and what has happened is temporary contracts have been kind of added on. People have acted up into more senior roles as the work has developed, and what hasn't happened is a kind of proper restructure to actually rebuild the permanent structure to relate to the core and current workload. So it's a cumulative thing, and what I think we're saying now is it's kind of reached its breaking point now. We've got so few staff now on permanent contracts with lack of security. 5 people in the culture team are on 1 week's notice. So it was really, rather than doing another kind of round of kind of temporary fixes, we were kind of at the edge of HR protocols. You need for people to be on proper contracts that reflect the work that they're doing.
Okay, Chair, and just one question that I'm not clear about in the papers. Are you saying then that your proposal is not to open vacancies that will be created, but to then make your establishment permanent with the staff that you've currently got? So you're going to make everybody you now have on payroll permanent?
Everyone who's in the team is in a safe place. That is the purpose of the stabilisation proposal.
Right.
So that means quite a few people who are on temporary contracts, fixed term contracts will move to permanent, and temporary will move on to fixed term. So everyone will get more security, but this is very much a kind of interim stabilisation plan for right now, this moment. And what we'll do is the original proposal will kind of, you know,
but it's fair to say that none of these people who will be getting permanent contract their jobs were never advertised. So these permanent jobs
there's no new
that
jobs.
will be created will not be advertised because you'll be slotting into them.
Yes, but we've done this through HR, so we're really clear that we've followed the protocols properly. So when people came in to do a fixed term post, that post would have been advertised as a fixed term post at that point for perhaps 6, 12 or 18 months. They will have gone through a competitive recruitment process to be allocated into that post, and that we've gone through each of the changes proposed in here with HR to make sure that we are dealing with the current staff properly, but also ensuring that we're not kind of giving anybody jobs who without a kind of fair and due competition process.
Okay, thanks. That's much clearer. Thank you.
Okay, I think you've got off fairly lightly. Thank you very much for your attendance. Members, we are recommended to note the reports. Is that agreed?
Agreed.
Agreed.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your attendance. I think we might pause for a second because we've got other guests coming and going. So I'll adjourn the meeting for 2 minutes.
GLA Chamber Sound. GLA Chamber Sound. GLA Chamber Sound. GLA Chamber Sound. GLA Chamber Sound.
Okay, is everyone comfy? Right. Okay, members, item 6 is the Mayor's marketing expenditure. I'd like to welcome to the meeting Leah Kreitzman, the Mayoral Director for External and International Affairs, and Emma Strain again, who is, as we've just heard, now wearing a different hat, which is called Assistant Director of External Affairs. Welcome to you both. Leah, would you like to make some opening remarks?
Yes, just very briefly, I'd like to thank you for inviting me here again. I think it'd be really useful to discuss some of the facts and figures that are now out there in the public domain, and it'd be good for us to add some clarity to them. But also, I think, you know, it's been a full financial year since we centralised the marketing budget. It's a great opportunity for us to tell you a little bit more about how that's going, answer your questions specifically about that, and hopefully take away some lessons and opportunities to extend some of the work further, particularly in supporting the work of the Assembly as well, which of course is part of the remit of Emma's marketing team too.
Thank you. So what was the reason for creating the centralised marketing budget? What's the thinking behind it?
So I think we'd all agree that part of the Mayor and the Assembly's role is to inform Londoners about what happens here and how our policies and programmes affect them and their lives. And a document prepared for the incoming mayoral administration, whoever that might be, in March 2016, set out a number of strategic weaknesses as they saw it in the GLA's engagement efforts. It pointed out that marketing campaigns and budgets were held with policy and programme delivery teams who weren't planning marketing and communications of their policies and programmes to Londoners. It said the approach meant that audiences were being targeted with multiple campaigns simultaneously, which was undermining the effectiveness of campaigns, and also that large swaths of Londoners were being missed out, so the harder to reach Londoners weren't being reached by communication from the Mayor or the Assembly. and market research conducted by the GLA towards the end of 2015, just ahead of this document being prepared, said that only 26% of Londoners reported being adequately informed by the Mayor and the Assembly about their work. And one of the central recommendations from that document was that we centralise the planning and budgeting process, the marketing work of the GLA. And this puts us in line with government, with all government departments, and most councils across the country, including London boroughs. So this is kind of entirely normal practice. I think it's worth noting that the central government has had a marketing budget in place for the last 8 years under the Government Communications Service, and in 2018 that budget is 300 million. And the Great campaign is their largest campaign with an annual budget of £60 million. So just to give you some context, so what we've done with the central marketing budget is something that Emma's team had proposed that whoever the new mayoral administration was implemented that, and it puts us in line with best practice of central government and local governments around London and the country. So that's the thinking behind it, really, to have better planning, better preparation, making sure that we were communicating with all Londoners and with messages that they wanted to hear in terms of policies and programmes they can access and how, and also to add a bit of transparency to this process, as I think what will come out in this discussion. Traditionally, it's been very difficult to track different parts of marketing and communication spend because they've been held across the organisation in different policy teams and tagged onto different codes. You're going to have to go into more detail on this, and it's not always consistent, so it has been very difficult to track spend. Now that's a lot more straightforward. Emma's team codes things, they know how and why, and therefore year on year it should be much more transparent and easy.
So from a budgetary point of view, it's effectively a tidying up exercise. How do you measure the effectiveness of what you're spending? How are you measuring the cut through?
Yeah, it's a really good question. There's different ways, it's different campaigns, and they're measured differently. So if we have kind of shorter term, clear call to action, so for example, take the winter campaign we did around rough sleeping. We know that's a really big problem for Londoners. They've said that at any opportunity directly to the Mayor, and also through kind of, research into what their concerns and priorities are. We've seen the increase across the country in rough sleeping, and obviously it's very visible when you see people sleeping on the streets. And so we did do a campaign last year to try and support those people who are rough sleeping. We had a really clear call to action. You could donate and you could refer rough sleepers to via StreetLink. So we had really clear KPIs. We wanted to let me make sure I've got exactly the right numbers on. We wanted to drive £150,000 in donations. That was our KPI for that campaign. And we wanted to increase the number of referrals via StreetLink. At the end of the campaign, a total of £197,000 had been donated, and referrals had increased from 5,000 to 8,000 on the previous year. So that was quite clear kind of KPIs that we were able to deliver against. Then we had other things about the reach of the campaign, etc. It's harder for campaigns like Behind Every Great City and London is Open, but we have different kinds of metrics for measuring those. Some are around the reach of our content, so how many people have seen some of that campaign content. So we know that over 5 million people have watched London is Open videos. So that's a very high number for kind of organic reach. But with Behind Every Great City, we wanted to make sure we're really engaging directly with Londoners, particularly women Londoners who are underrepresented senior levels. So we've been doing that more from a partner approach through events. So for example, 500,000 Londoners I think have been reached through partners and our events. Is that right, Emma? We've also got figures against whether women in particular see the GLA as prioritising gender equality, and I think that's gone up by 4 points, which is obviously useful. But also we measure its success in terms of policies delivered as well through those campaigns. So the Our Time initiative, which we launched earlier this year in the first cohort, including someone from Secretariat, which is great. So it's genuinely across the GLA, but also across all of our functional bodies are participating in this scheme. For the first time, we've got Transport for London, the Metropolitan Police, the London Fire Brigade, our development agencies, and the whole GLA family embarking on a new initiative to increase gender equality in our organisations. We also had a metrics about partners taking that on. We wanted 4, I think. We've got 6 private sector and public sector organisations taking on that initiative. So the way we measure campaigns depends on the campaign, depends on the objectives and outcomes. We can share the metrics we use for each campaign, if you'd like, rather than have me kind of flick through here and read them out. But broadly speaking, they're around reach and engagement. Yeah. And then if there's a clear call to action, we can measure that as well.
Yeah, because I think it would be very useful. I think we will take you up on that. It would be quite useful to see the metrics. Because I was going to ask, the 2 examples you gave right at the beginning were good examples of different kinds of campaigns. The first one, the homelessness one, you can measure the success of that by how many referrals. That was key because these are X number of people that you've helped. The second one, London is Open, I accept your point. It's very much more difficult to measure the impact of that because that's not, I don't know what the right word would be for it, but it's not something that's leading to a definite outcome that you can measure in that way. I was going to ask you, and maybe it will be kept in the report that you're going to send me, or send us I should say, what's the balance in your marketing spend? So how much of it is on the outcome-based thing, such as homelessness, where you can measure the number of people who benefit by it, and how much of it is on the messaging side of things, like London is Open and that sort of thing?
Yeah, I can tell you, again, it depends a little bit on the audience and the channel. We try to be quite focused on who we want to reach. So if you take something like the renting strand of our housing campaign, renting is particularly relevant to younger Londoners. And we know that a really good way of reaching those Londoners is through social media. And we also know that social media is a very cost-effective way of reaching people. We know that with our campaign last year on better boilers, so there was you could get a grant to upgrade your boiler if you were in fuel poverty, essentially. Those people are much harder to reach. It's more expensive. It's more hand-to-hand. You have to actually go out and find those people to ensure that they're aware of the work that we're doing. So the cost does depend on what you're trying to achieve and with which audience. So it's more cost-effective and cheaper to reach an audience that's very active on social media in lots of ways than it is other audiences. But broadly speaking, we have a breakdown of the kind of what we budgeted for each campaign. The highest amount is actually our events for Londoners, because that covers quite a wide range of events, and we go out and try and encourage lots of Londoners to engage with that. So that's actually our highest marketing spend kind of for campaigns. And then beyond that, there's fairly similar breakdown. So the housing campaign, including rough sleeping, was £148,000. London is Open was 133 in total. So there are kind of there's not a huge spectrum, but broadly speaking, they're around that amount. And then we try and maximise our in-kind support. So whilst we've invested 125,000 thereabouts in Behind Every Great City, the government gave us a grant of over 400,000 to deliver that campaign and different elements of it. So we really do try and maximise other revenue and investment channels. London is Open has received a huge amount of in-kind support. Just one example is the flags that ran down Regent Street and Oxford Street. The commercial value of that is over £250,000. We didn't pay anything to the West End Company for that. They wanted to do it. MTV EMAs, I think, is a great example of how we worked with a commercial organisation for London is Open, knowing that they had a global audience, mainly in Europe, but global audience of over 19 million. And we were the headline sponsor, as it were, of the EMAs. Normally, that would cost, in a commercial deal, over £3 million. But we didn't, obviously, spend anything on that. So we really do try and maximise and amplify the campaigns in kind.
Okay. One other sort of clarificatory question, and then I'm going to ask Assembly Member Arnold to come in. The centralised budget is around about £1 million, and it's about how you categorise that, the question I'm going to be asking. So around about half of it, according to the figures that we have, about 511,000 is on advertising, design, production and printing. And there's a quarter spent on publicity and PR. From your classification perspective, what's the difference between spending on advertising and spending on publicity? What's the difference between the two, spending and advertising? Yeah.
So Emma can go into detail here, because I think actually maybe the figures you're referring to are from an FOI that included the spend to that date rather than the total financial year. Obviously we have that now, so we can update on that. But I think The difference is advertising we include are paid for advertising. So that could be social media advertising, for example. It could be if you have a radio ad or something in a newspaper. Publicity and PR is the generation of the content that we then use organically or in that paid advertising.
Right, okay.
But I will say that, again, they're not always coded perfectly. And there is an issue with the way our finance system works for things that could potentially be coded in a different way. So if you were in a policy team and you were producing a leaflet, you might say that's advertising or you might say that's content production. And a different team and a different person could code the same thing quite differently. And until now, we haven't been able to account for that.
Yeah. Has that changed now?
Well, the centralised marketing budget is what gives us that huge benefit, because now we're centralising all of the major campaigns and we're running much more integrated campaigns. Yeah. It's much easier for us to track that ourselves and to be much clearer about what is being spent on what, whereas previously, 2016 and prior to that, the activity was happening all over the building. And therefore, as Leah says, one person's piece of advertising content is the next person's printed document. So the data gets quite difficult to kind of comprehend. It's just worth me saying that, and I noted that there's a table of data that you guys had put together as part of this process. That data is the communication spend across the whole of the GLA. So that is more than just the central marketing budget from a 17-18 perspective. So that includes, for example, the London plan and their statutory communications printings that they need to do, and a whole bunch of other printed materials that the building does. So just to be really clear, that those figures are pan-GLA, and while the vast majority of the marketing budget is now centralised with us, there is of course other communications activity that the building still needs to do. So take for and those figures, for example, would include the media monitoring budget. So that's the press team, as you'll be aware, because you will receive the press cuts that come through on a regular basis. That figure will fall into the press and PR category of spend. There's about 170 grand of spend in there. And that services both of us.
Is there a separate Mayor's Office marketing budget?
No.
So that's within the central budget?
Yes. Okay.
Does the Mayor have any particular influence over, or the Mayor's Office have any particular influence over marketing and advertising that, say, Transport for London or any of the other functional bodies do?
So there's always been, and this precedes me, fortnightly meetings with TfL's marketing team that continued when this administration came in. I tend not to attend those, but I get readouts from those from Emma and the team, which is basically so we know what is going to be on the TfL network. And but TfL have obviously their own marketing budgets, their own agencies, and they do their work to promote their services as they wish. I sit on the steering committee for the TfL advertising policy, but that's the commercial advertising rather than TfL advertising.
So there's some interaction, but it's which would be surprising if there were not, but it's not coming out of your budget line in any way.
No, it doesn't come out of the budget, and I don't have any kind of oversight of what strategically TfL decide to communicate from a marketing perspective either, but what they do use me for is a kind of safe pair of hands, and I look through the materials that they are producing. So I might look at a piece of cycling advertising and look at it from a diversity perspective, because sometimes cycling can be a topic which isn't as diverse as it quite can be, and so some of the representations from a visual perspective, they use us from a kind of sounding board. Okay. Yeah, those fortnightly meetings have been going on since I've been in post, so about the last 4 years.
Okay. Assemblymember Arnold, you wanted to come in?
Yeah, just following on from that then. So when we see posters about GLA activities on TfL, are you saying there's no payback in terms of there's no chargeback?
No, it's a gifted inventory. So TfL, I think for many years, certainly not just the last two, TfL have gifted the GLA a certain amount of inventory.
Right.
So certain number of poster spots or digital spots that the GLA can use to promote its activities. As you'll see, we tend to use them for events, to drive people to Mayoral events.
Right.
So
People's Question Time.
Exactly. So People's Question Time goes up there, and we're able to say to TfL, the next People's Question Time is in your patch net, so we can say, can you please put the posters in your stations in that area? Right. So local people will see those. So we can direct them in that sense, as in we would like our inventory to be in the areas where it's most relevant to the people locally. So People's Question Time, State of London debate, fireworks, when we want to tell people firstly you can buy tickets, and then secondly, if you haven't got a ticket, please don't come. And and those kinds of things. So they do gift us an amount of inventory, which I think totals just over 2 million.
Okay. No, I was going to say that even if gifted, there's got to be a cost to that.
Yeah,
so for TfL, that gift to the GLA is about 2 million.
But it's space that they haven't sold.
Oh, okay.
Do you see what I mean? So it's not like we're taking up spots. So the inventory will change depending. So there are times of the year where there's not as much paid for advertising on the network, and we might have more inventory at those times, for example.
Yeah, no, that answers, because I think it does bring about a little bit of clarity. Now, the specific question that I had relating to the budget is, when people say, or when departments say they've only got $1 million, you think to yourself, well, so what, you know? And you have to see that in the context of how other organisations, how much other organisations spend. And I know we're unique and all of this stuff. But, you know, in terms of budgets and the work that you're required to do in terms of delivering on the mayoral priorities, how does this relate to the spend, say, from the Scottish Parliament and, you know, despite them being a parliament, but in terms of the work?
Yeah.
So Scottish Welsh Assembly, and we know government is, you know, starts off at a huge amount of something like 200 million, but where on the scale of things does the GLA budget sit?
Do you know?
I don't.
We will tell you where on the scale. We'll try and find kind of equivalent organisations. What we did to reach this million figure, just so you're aware, is that was basically what was being spent across the organisation. Yeah. So it wasn't an additional figure. It's not more money spent on marketing. It's saying this is how much roughly, based on the kind of what we could tell from the financial system and codes, and therefore this is what we will centralise. And then
and that's what you're living within. So you're living within that budget. Then that then leads me to my question is, you know, you've identified some really great campaigns that nobody would argue with, but surely there are areas that are in need of similar great campaigns. I could give you a whole list of them, and so could Tom, and so could everybody else. So what are we to say to Londoners if their area is not prioritised, even though it may be referenced in the mayoral manifesto?
Yeah, I mean, it's obviously it's a decision-making process where there is prioritisation, and I think you know that I'm all ears when you have ideas about things that we should be doing, and I've sat down with Tom to discuss some of his ideas for campaigns and how we can integrate them better into things like London is Open, so really happy to continue to do that, of course. I think that, you know, Behind Every Great City is a really good example where we've had tremendous support from the Assembly, including from yourself, on delivering that campaign, and there is now an Assembly working group on a strand of that campaign that my team are working directly with both Caroline's and with yourself, Jeanette, and with Andrew, and that's really positive. And so we definitely want to ensure that when we're doing things that are very much about London and its reputation and its history, so whether that's London is Open or Behind Every Great City, that we are extremely inclusive in the ethos of those campaigns and want to work with the Assembly. And I think any other ideas for campaigns that we should be doing and aren't at the moment, then we are all ears. We try and do things that reflect the priorities and needs of Londoners. So that's why we're focusing on housing, on crime, and on promoting London's economy and its values at this quite challenging time for the city.
Okay, well that will do for now, because I'm coming back with a question about how you work with the Assembly on marketing.
Assemblymember Prince.
I just wanted to come in on the comparison of the advertising spend budget by us and that by other regional assemblies. And I was just going to say that in industry, the ad spend is usually expressed as a percentage of the turnover, and there's what's acceptable levels for that. Clearly, we're not an industry, so we're not selling packets of crisps, so it's a different matrix. But it would be interesting to know, compared to, say, maybe local government,
Mm-hmm.
what our spend is as a percentage and what
Yeah,
you know,
we can do that.
the mean mode and averages for local government and or the I think a bit difficult with the Scottish Parliament, but maybe the Welsh Assembly perhaps.
Yeah, we'll have a look into it.
Oh, go on. All right. Okay. So, just carrying on the advertising bent, we noticed that in 2016-17, over 2 million was spent on advertising and design, compared to $500,000, according to the figures in 17-18. Why is there such a big difference in that
I
spend?
mean, Emma can go into detail, but in short, there was an election in 2016, and the authority spent quite a lot of money promoting the fact there was an election. Yeah, that falls under that budget.
And this is the point I was making about that set of data, is that's all communication, so every single piece of communication coded against those particular codes in our finance system will be brought out. So the booklet for the elections marketing campaign, we've been capturing those costs.
Right. Yeah.
The $500,000 figure is a part year figure. So the full figure for 17-18 is roughly $1 million. Comparable to the 2 million that you've quoted, but of course that includes election spend.
Now, you say that we get complementary ad space from TfL, but of course there's still the design cost involved in that, isn't there?
We do cover the design costs,
And we also cover the print and production, print and production, as you'd expect, and
obviously.
posting them up in.
And do they do we have to? How do we split that budget? Because we've obviously got a mayor's budget, haven't we? And we've got the overall budget, and there's no differential between the mayor and the assembly. How do we sort of ensure that the assembly's getting a fair crack of the whip?
We use the space on the TfL inventory for both the PQT events, particularly. So that and the
Which
way
I would say benefits the mayor more than the assembly, if I could be so bold.
Well, the way we split the assets though is that we would have a set of assets associated to PQT, and we would divide those equally. So we run two different poster campaigns, one featuring the assembly, one featuring the mayor, and we divide it up 50-50. So so
on all of that,
for the PQT
and
events.
the entire budget is run like that as well, is it?
No.
No. Right. What about the rest of the budget?
We do it depending on the different campaign and priority. So not everything goes on. We do things that will never make it onto the TfL network. Right. Not everything that we are doing or talking about or communicating or using marketing spend on from the GLA goes onto the TfL network.
I appreciate that. My question, sorry, my fault. My question was, that explains what happens on the TfL aspect. On the broader aspect, where we may do a poster ad campaign or broadcast media or whatever, not involving. Am I? Oh, then I'll retract that question. Sorry, I didn't yet. I'll retract that. What I would like to ask then, just finally, and apologies to whoever I've trodden on.
That's me.
So I do apologise. Then just finally, do we get contra? In the ad industry, contra is quite a common thing. So, for instance, to give you an industry example, if I was a crisp manufacturer, staying with that, I might give you loads of packets of crisps and then you give me free advertising. So is there any contra that we do at all, or have we explored that aspect?
I'm trying to think what we could give someone.
Well, you gave an example earlier about the £3 million worth of advertising.
Oh, but that's just basically us trying. So when we have a campaign, that something like London is Open is a really good example where we engaged business very early and we said, we think we share your concerns about the immediate aftermath of the EU referendum and what it says about our city to visitors, tourists and to Londoners, and we want to ensure that we're able to put across the message that London is still open-minded, outward-looking, welcoming, and businesses shared that and wanted to therefore support that campaign. And also because that campaign had I think quite a clear and distinct brand, that David Shrigley London, that I think you'd probably all recognise, that they felt was something they could use and get behind. It wasn't a mayoral brand, it wasn't a GLA brand, it wasn't political. It was about London, and they supported it. And so that's how we do that. There's no quid pro quo.
Well, there is actually, but you probably haven't realised it. Is that you're giving the credibility of the GLA to support what they're doing, and that's what we have, and I think this is where we're missing out.
Well, except there's no GLA branding on any of this material, so
yeah,
I'm not sure, and only 26% of Londoners have any idea about what we're doing.
Well, then that's a bit of that's an indictment, but the point I'm trying to make is that we have a brand. It is a strong brand. People do know what the GLA is, and we should be using that. The same as when the Met Police went out to procure Met Trace. They got a massive discount from Smartwater because they now allow Smartwater to let other people in the world know that they are the sole supplier of Met Trace. So we have a brand, and it's just a case we should.
I think the Mayor of London has a brand. I would honestly dispute whether the GLA has a strong and recognisable brand and whether it needs one. We can have that conversation. But I think that we price ourselves well when it comes to trying to get support for our campaigns. We understand that from a budget of 130,000 for London is Open, we've generated in the region of about 6 million in kind, which I think is pretty impressive. We're very proud of that campaign. We think we've had a lot of impact with that campaign, and if you compare that to the Great campaign, which has an annual budget of 60 million, I think we're doing very well. Also, we've been working with FCO and with embassies around the world who really like to use the London is Open campaign because they understand that great doesn't resonate brilliantly in lots of countries when you're trying to talk about the UK. London is Open does, and so we share all of our content with those embassies around the world, and they use them to promote London in their local capitals. So I totally take your point. I don't think there's an obvious quid pro quo. We don't offer anything to them in return. We ask them to be involved where we think that there's a good strategic fit, and I think that we price that well.
So just finally then, what are we doing to raise the awareness of the GLA brand if it's as bad as you say?
But there's a difference for me between the brand of the Assembly, the Mayor and the GLA. So since Sadiq's been the Mayor, but also when Boris was in the Mayor too, we've been really clear from research that Londoners don't know who the GLA is. There was a press article only last week where we were referred to as the Greater London Assembly, when they meant the Greater London Authority. And there's every other connotation of that acronym you could put together. People don't really understand. They understand what City Hall is as a building, and that's why we've used City Hall emblematically for things, because they understand that the Assembly and the Mayor sit here, but they don't really understand what the GLA itself is and the staff are.
We think it's important that we promote the work of the Assembly and how Londoners can engage with that work, and the Mayor and how Londoners can engage with that work. I think just promoting the brand of the GLA would not be a good use of taxpayers' money.
Okay.
If you take the london.gov.uk website, we co-brand that with the Mayor and the Assembly, but not with the GLA for the same reason.
Yeah, I've seen that. Yeah, thank you.
Okay. Assemblymember Whittle.
Hi, Leah. Hi. Actually, just before I ask this question, do you ever work? How closely do you ever work with the press office? The Assembly press people. Do you ever work with them?
Assembly press people.
Yes. I mean, I'm thinking, just going on from what Assemblymember Prince just said.
Yeah.
There's this problem of profile and all the rest of it. I know they also have that problem that they're facing. How to get people to know what we are and what we do and everything.
You're also poaching on...
Oh, am I? Sorry. Just we're so full of enthusiasm.
We've got it in for you today, Jeanette. I'm sorry.
Sorry, whoever I'm poaching on, I'm very, very sorry. I will go back to my script. Okay.
Question.
Stealing the grand finale.
Okay, what I'd like to ask is there's a separate budget line here of 1.39 million for marketing staff.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now that's quite a growth. It's I think 40%. I've got 40%. In fact, doubling in the past 8 years. And I just would like to know what all these extra people are doing.
Yeah, I'm really glad that you've raised this, because obviously we would have otherwise, because I think it's quite important to clarify that figure that you've quoted and the Assembly have quoted, I think, in your press release and in a tweet earlier today, and I think that came from the Assembly rather than any one of you. That figure includes the digital transformation team. That is not the figure for the marketing team.
Really?
Yeah.
What difference does that make then to the figure?
That's the digital transformation team, the increase which this committee signed off last year. And that includes all of the back office maintenance of the website, which hosts all of the Assembly's content as well as the Mayor's. And that figure represents an increase. But the marketing staffing increase has grown by 10% since Sadiq was Mayor. But it's worth noting that under the previous Mayor, the marketing staff budget grew by 33% between 2013 and 2016. So we've seen a 10% increase in the last 2 years. That's partly in recognition of the fact that the GLA has changed responsibilities, and also we have increased to meet the new demand around engagement and social media and trying to increase the relevance and engagement with Londoners. So we have had a 10% increase in staffing in marketing since 2016, not 40%.
Not 40%.
You're including the digital transformation team in that, which is the website, the back end of the website.
How many people are in that team?
Marketing.
In the marketing team.
I'm going to hand, I should clarify as well. I don't do any day-to-day management of either the budget or the staff of the marketing team. That's Emma's role. Emma and I work very closely together on setting the priorities and working out the best campaign routes. But when it comes to actual staffing and things like that, I'm going to have to defer.
It's also just worth pointing out that the growth that's showing in the budget, if you look at the 17-18 figure, is the posts that came to oversight in March 2017 that were approved, and a number of those posts were about changing people from fixed-term posts into permanent posts, which is a legacy from when we rebuilt the website. So we brought in some additional digital people to enable us to do a much better job in building that website, being able to represent both the Mayor's content, the Assembly's content, and also MOPAC and OPDC's content much more appropriately from a website perspective. So that growth was signed off. The way the finance system works, Martin can confirm this to me, is that the change, we had an oversight committee in March 2017, but they don't reflect that into the actual data final budgets until the following year. So that's where that looks like there's been a growth, but that growth has all come through this panel.
I see. So it's 10%, not 40. That's the main thing.
Yeah.
You should note that. If he's gone out in press releases and what have you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Assemblymember Russell.
I want to pick up on two of the big campaigns, London is Open and the Behind Every Great City. First of all, with London is Open, you've spoken, Leah, about how that has been very useful abroad with people using it, that it's a brand that doesn't feel political, that that people feel comfortable using. I just wonder, in terms of Londoners, who you're trying to reach with it, and are you reaching them through conventional advertising or through social media advertising?
I think that it's a brand that works quite hard because it can do quite a lot of things. It can speak to an international business audience about London being open for business. Also to Londoners who, in the aftermath of the election, and still some of them feel quite insecure and vulnerable. We saw a spike in hate crime against European Londoners in the immediate aftermath, which obviously was dreadful, and also one of the reasons that sparked us starting this campaign, to really try and say to those Londoners that they're welcome. So we have used this campaign to go out to community groups when for example, during religious festivals, we encourage them to use London is Open as an umbrella if they're trying to do community events. So we had lots of interfaith iftars and things like that used London is Open as a way of demonstrating that we had this unifying force around different communities. We worked with places and community groups or other organisations where people convene. So, for example, QPR and Chelsea and other London clubs got behind the campaign because they know that they have lots of reach into London communities. And so, yes, we have tried to reach Londoners first and foremost with the London is Open campaign. It has the dual function of speaking to an international business audience as well, which we think is incredibly helpful.
So you're contacting them, you've got the sort of event based use of the brand. But should we be seeing it on the tube, or are we seeing it on social media?
Yeah, so
or is it specifically around events?
So you remember that we did have it on the tube in 2016 when we launched the campaign, and you might remember seeing quite big commissioned posters, not just of the Shrigley, but we had several different artists, whether it's the Jeremy Deller at Brixton Tube and things like that. So we went out to the creative industries and said, help us. We want to create a campaign that feels like it's open source in the ethos of being, London is open. So we said, create what you like with it. And some really beautiful creations came back, and we then exhibited them on the network. We worked with Art on the Underground to do that. We would like to revisit that again this year, because we think there's a need to kind of really give that message another boost. So yes, any ideas of how to particularly reach specific communities or groups would be helpful. But yeah, we are doing Pan London on the TfL network and on social media. The London is Open videos were deliberately made to be very shareable. So we didn't actually need to do a lot of seeding or any spend behind a lot of those.
So what kind of reach did you get with those videos?
I think it's 5 million views, and I'll have to check the number of shares, but I think it's in the hundreds of thousands.
So was that organic reach, or that was promoted?
Yeah, I'd have to give you the actual breakdown of what was seeded and what wasn't. So we can do that. Yeah,
that would be interesting.
Yeah,
and so how much did you actually spend on the London is Open campaign?
£133,000.
And
that's on top of my head.
In big chunks, how does that break down in terms of social media and kind of design of actual materials and?
Yeah. Do you have a breakdown of the budget? We can send you a breakdown of the budget. Okay, bearing in mind it will be against those codes that are sometimes not entirely accurate, but we will do our best in terms of. So, for example, we pay for the production and design for everything that went on the TfL network, so we can tell you how much, for example, that costs. We can tell you how much the video production costs and that kind of thing. Yeah.
And how do you? I mean, obviously, you've got these very different ways that those London is Open campaign messages are being got out. So you've got your international business people. So and you've also got your sort of community interfaith work that's about pulling Londoners together. And how do you evaluate those two different strands of the work, and how do you know that you're successful with that campaign?
Yeah, so some of it is around the partners that we've got on board. So we know which partners have shared the campaign, bearing in mind that we feel that if they've shared it, they feel like it resonates and the message works for them. So we know that from a business audience and how they've engaged. We also know that from a community audience, because obviously we can track their hashtag. Yep. Some of it is through reach and engagement of our content. Obviously, offline content is quite difficult, to gauge. So we try and do some kind of sentiment testing. We ask people. L&P ask their international business audiences often which messages are working best in terms of promoting London as the best place for investment and for students and for tourists. And so we try and get that information from L&P and then adjust our international messaging appropriately.
I mean, that obviously works with the international business type, but I'm thinking about for the communities.
Yeah.
How do you know how successful that campaign is? How do you have a sense of how many different organisations have used it?
Yeah, so we have a sense of how many organisations have shared it and used it. Yes, and also from engaging with them, we know kind of from sentiment testing essentially how they feel about it. So we know, for example, that the Polish community are keen to use it around some of their 100-year anniversary celebrations later this year. We held a round table of the EU ambassadors who represent the largest diaspora communities in London in 2016, and we're having another one in a few months' time. But we were able to ask them at that point which of these messages are really working with your communities, and asking them to share it, which they did. So there's different ways, but it's not as easy as saying how many people have watched this film and shared it. I appreciate that.
Sure. And then just finally, on the Behind Every Great City campaign, how are you trying to reach what I think you described as the harder to reach communities of women who, you know, really are the women behind this great city? What are you doing to, and which audience is there? How are you trying to reach them?
Yeah, so we've been working with organisations that know how to reach those women and are working with them already, and particularly focusing on young women. So we've worked with the Fawcett Society in partnership with their schools programme. So we launched the campaign with them actually in a school, and we've been engaging with them throughout. And so that's been a really helpful way of reaching a group of younger people that we always find quite difficult to reach, and particularly younger women. We've also been engaging with the groups that try and particularly work with more vulnerable women, so Red Box, who work with women who, young girls and women in period poverty, for example. We've been trying to work in particular with BME media outlets, because we know we have a particular, this building has particular difficulty engaging with younger BME women, very disengaged group. So through podcasts that we know that they listen to, through media that we know that they consume. So that's how we've been trying to do that. So it's a much smaller scale, but more targeted as well.
And so, do you report back on that kind of monitoring of
that
reach?
So for example, I think we had an ambition, we wanted to engage 150 partners in this campaign. We've got 65 so far, so we do have a little way to go by the end of the year in terms of partner engagement. But we did set ourselves that kind of stretch target because we knew that was going to be the best way for us to get to the women that we wanted to see this campaign. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Assembly Member Duval.
Just listening to this all this afternoon, you just feel, you know, for all the moaning minis about who go on about the expenditure in this area, and you think about how much you've spent on the London is Open campaign and the many multi-ways it can be used, of repositioning about what this great world-class city is about, is that we should really be congratulating you, really. And then moving on to, you know, behind every great city, of trying to establish something about that's long overdue, about the role and worth of women in our society and where you know, what part they play in our society, is I just got admiration for the work. It's setting the pace, I think. And if we did the reverse issue about how, if we were, it's quite interesting about the private sector, of how much we've done that from a municipal point of view, because we're not some product. We can't, you know, it's not like a brand, you know, which brand is stronger, of trying to sell over an image that's so important. I can't underestimate how important the London is Open campaign in these difficult times about, from a business perspective, never mind from a community perspective, of saying, actually, let's start reaching out, let's start understanding each other, what we're about around that. So I want to congratulate you on that. I want to turn to a difficult issue now. In terms of about the most recent campaign, I think you've undertaken, very difficult, contentious, the knife crime prevention campaign. So London needs you alive. Another important message. Everyone takes it for granted that that's what we want. Yeah. So I understand that. What are the mechanics of that? Is this your budget or is this MOPAC's budget? How do we do it? You've accumulated, I think, in the previous administration, this administration, an whole host of experience and expertise that, quite frankly, others won't have, including those who've been around for a lot longer, I suspect. So how does it work when you work with partner organisations? What are they contributing? Or, you know, and are you not solely in control, but how do you work this through with MOPAC or the MPS even around this?
You're right that's the most tricky campaign that we're doing in terms of the audience, in terms of the message and everything else, but definitely, and in terms of the number of stakeholders involved. I think that one thing's worth noting is London is Open, Behind Every Great City, and London Needs You Alive, I think, is really good examples of campaigns that would not have happened had we not centralised the marketing budget, because they don't fit in any one policy team. And you know, that would have required Emma to have gone cap in hand basically to the different policy teams in a way that we don't have to now. So London Needs You Alive budget has come from MOPAC, but the marketing team run the campaign.
Right.
So that's how we've done it.
So are they the client?
We try not to treat it like that genuinely, because it's a team of people drawing on MOPAC expertise, drawing on marketing expertise and how you deliver a message, and then the youth and education team. So it's really kind of a cross-organisational, but those are the three main teams involved: marketing, MOPAC, and education and youth. And it's I think quite a good example of how we can take something that, had it been run by MOPAC or by the Met, would have probably carried a very different message than if they'd said, we want you to lead on delivering this campaign, this is the budget, and this is the outcome that we really want to see. Because I think they acknowledge that the police, MOPAC and the Mayor are not the best message carriers to a group of 13 to 16-year-old people vulnerable of picking up a knife. And so we worked with an agency on that campaign and did quite a lot of testing with those young people about who they did listen to and respect and want to hear from, and what kind of messages they think are missing. And the most recent Met Youth Voice survey has said that over 53%, so the majority of young people surveyed, said that the London Needs You Alive campaign has made them think more about what can be the consequences of carrying a knife, which is, you know, encouraging. Obviously, there's still a long way to go on this issue. And it's something that similarly the government have picked up. They did a much bigger, much shorter time frame, but much bigger in terms of scope and value of a campaign that was similarly targeted at that group. It's also taken us to quite a different place than usual when it comes to reaching those people. We've been advertising via PlayStation, for example, which we wouldn't do on some of the other things. So we have really tried to really make sure that that campaign is going in front of the right people, on phone boxes and bus stops near their schools, directly through PlayStation, Snapchat and Instagram, rather than Facebook, for example, where they just aren't. None of them are on Facebook. So that's been an interesting, I think, learning for the team, working very closely with MOPAC in a way they haven't previously, and also bringing MOPAC and the education and youth team together.
Now, logically, we're looking at children at risk and, you know, that, but we know it's a very small percentage that are a risk to themselves and a risk to the community, right? So the next logical steps is to take that campaign and, dare I say it, put it to what controversy, next to drill music, you know, sort of postings on YouTube or not. Because if we believe what we're being told by media and others of what's driving that up, that we might get to that small percentage that's causing harm to themselves and to others. Do you know what I mean? Because it is small numbers relatively. We're talking about, you know, 95% of our young people are not criminals, who are not carrying knives, who are not a threat to us, are law-abiding citizens and will be great law-abiding citizens in the future. It's a small percentage that do that. So, you know, is that where you take the campaign next? And then I suppose logically about London Needs You Alive, it's not just about knife crime, it's about violent crime, isn't it?
That's right.
And there's some issues that can go back into about women and, you know, in terms of facing violence or facing threats and intimidation around that, of where do they get advice to and not. Where are you going with this campaign? And where do you target it next, and where do we widen it out? I'm just conscious of the knife crime issue. We always tend to think it is that younger cohort that's been murdered in the city, but actually there's a substantial number of over 26, and in amongst that 100 we've got at least 15 or so domestic violence murders.
Yeah, no, you're quite right. I think, so we're looking at different ways now that we can provide counter messages to people who are going online and looking for things that are probably quite dangerous. And some of that is from YouTube and then also on Google search and things like that. So that is something the team is looking at. I think it's also worth saying that we're constantly testing and learning what is working and what isn't. I think the London Needs You Alive campaign evolved from its initial campaign push to then focus on this toolkit for educators and parents and things like that. And we had a target of downloads which we did exceed, but still we've got more to do on that, because that's much more detailed, much higher bar entry into a campaign. That's asking them to really do some quite proactive things. And then also with the Our London Summer work, which again was for all young Londoners, not just those either at risk or actually carrying. We did find, though, that whilst we were targeting that at the younger age group, it was their parents who were using the information. So we weren't necessarily expecting that, and that is something we now need to learn from, that we targeted a group and it was actually their parents who were using the service. That's still good, we want their parents to, but it's not what we had intended, and we need to now think, okay, how do we make this more relevant to that group? So it's a constant process of kind of iteration. I totally agree with you about, obviously, the complexities of this and the other people involved and victims involved. And we can certainly take that back, and I'd be keen to discuss that. Certainly violence against women and girls and domestic violence, who largely kind of a victim of that, is something that we're looking at.
I think this work is a bit pacemaker-ish, in the sense that I don't think any other city in this country is working on that level of trying and test in sort of unknown areas.
Yeah.
And certainly, we've got the chair of the PCC here, we should try and share some of that work back into our debates that we're doing. But, you know, I'm very excited by it. It's one of the most serious, I think all your work is quite serious, but this is one of the ones we need to crack long term, and it should be quite interesting to see how it progresses.
Yeah, thank you.
Well done.
Thank you.
Well done.
I mean, just on that, I mean, exactly, it's probably the most important work that you're doing, but I probably would say that. But we did have guests, witnesses at PCC, who were somewhat critical of the, and you probably heard this, of the coverage and the rate of engagement, bear in mind the investment. That is not to be a moaning mini or critical, but it's we did hear that. No, well, and that's what, and I accept that, and I got here late and I apologise. So, briefly, how did they kind of get that a bit wrong, or were they not looking at it in the same manner?
I think there's different. I think obviously if there are people who have ideas of how we can change and adapt this campaign to make it more effective, we want to hear them genuinely, because we've tried to do this through a process of engagement with young people, because we are not the target audience of this campaign, you know. So it's really important that we do that. And if there are people who work with those young people, who are those young people who have feedback, we always want to hear it. I would say though that I think some of that was broader about engagement more generally, and other parts not focused just on London Needs You Alive. We have had good feedback as well, obviously, including, I don't know, sorry Steve, if you were here when we talked about the Met survey, which said that the majority of young people did feel like the message was getting through, which is important. But we absolutely want constructive feedback that can make our campaign better, of course.
That's good to hear. Thank you, Chair.
We have now reached Assemblymember Arnold's, before anyone else steals the question.
This is the most important
question for us.
Because as you've seen, a number of members have tried to come in on this, and I wonder why. And the question is, what are we getting out of this spend? But let me just say, we know about the PQT posters, and we know clearly we've got a website. And it could be better. But let me ask seriously, and bringing my friend as a point, can you just tell us briefly about your working relationship with the Assembly Comms and Media team? Because that would seem an important relationship to have, because in the same way that you have a sense of what you're going to promote in terms of mayoral priorities, which are set. Ours are evolving in terms of our programme of work, but I don't know, and I may be wrong, of any conversations that are had that flags up, you know, maybe one or two subjects in the year. And if we haven't done that yet, why haven't we? And would you agree with me that we should, as soon as possible, start to work that way?
Yes, absolutely. I would say that we work closely so for example, there are several events that we work very closely with the comms team in for the Assembly. So whether that's Holocaust Memorial Day, Armed Forces Day, 7/7 Memorial, the things that we do as the GLA,
as a joint,
that are joint, then there is very close coordination and collaboration, and that's important. And obviously that will continue, but extremely happy to sit down with members of the team as appropriate and do that forward planning. Absolutely.
Because I don't think we're aware of that. Let me just use an example of, say, a population piece, and use my own example. I've just finished a report on the issues to do with special educational needs, London-wide, well received by the press, but at no time, and I thought I knew the structure, but at no time did I think I could look to get in some sort of marketing link or hook with the marketing team. So is that because that would be inappropriate, or is that because the Assembly and our work and the way we work has not moved into that territory yet?
I think we probably need to have the conversation, because it would depend it was important to have seen that. You know, so we never just market something just kind of
no, we
to
wouldn't
everyone
expect
in the hope that
but the conversation should be had.
Absolutely, and we can have that conversation for sure.
But I don't think and I don't get the feeling that scrutiny, I may be wrong, know that they can have that conversation. Am I right or wrong, Emma?
I will say though, there has been an increase in the comms team for the Assembly, right? By three posts additional, which should be helping to do that work. But
Alison and I have a really good relationship, but I agree with you, I don't think we do enough talking. And it's probably because we're all just a bit busy rushing around doing stuff. So, very happy to formalise that relationship more, so Alison and I sit down regularly and kind of look at what's coming forward and where there might be synergies and overlaps.
Well, I'm just putting it to you, because if this job is about promoting the Mayor and the Assembly, then there should be some conversations about the Assembly's output. And that hasn't been had. And so we need to get that going.
One of the things that we do is Alison and her team talk to the marketing team and the digital comms team around some of the more technical things as well. So things like streaming of Assembly events and Mayoral events. We've now worked together so that we do those things much more consistently, and that when we have technical learnings around the way that things like Facebook advertising works and things work, we share those with Alison and her team. But I think we don't do it in a very formal manner at the moment. So there's definitely more opportunity for us to work together from that perspective at the very least.
I'm only pressing the point because when you get surveys that talk about awareness and understanding about the Mayor, which would peak at, I don't know, what percent is that? You will know, Leah. Understanding of the Mayor.
We haven't done one of those awareness surveys for a while, though.
But it would be, say,
who are aware of the Mayor and his work.
The Mayor and
I
his
imagine
work.
it would be quite high.
Right. Awareness of the Assembly
would be lower.
So therefore, there's a piece of work to be done using marketing and using the expertise that is in a central team like yours.
Just to be clear, though, we use our marketing to ensure that Londoners are aware of the policies, programmes and services. So it's not about promoting the Assembly.
No, it wouldn't be about...
It's about the work that you do, and we're very happy to have a conversation about how we can better get across to Londoners the work that the Assembly is doing.
It's only about knowing the work that we do that they can understand the Assembly. I wouldn't suggest for a moment that you'd be marketing.
We're not going to do a brand campaign
you'd be
on the London
marketing
Assembly.
Tom Copley, because what value is he to us? But I'm talking about specifically, his work on, say, championing issues to do with justice for Londoners travellers or a particular piece of work, then that is, to me, as relevant as the campaign you've got on London is Open. You know what I mean? So I'm just saying that if we haven't had those sort of conversations before about the Assembly's work programme, looking at that and saying what pieces of work's the Assembly doing that could be promoted to say this work has been done by the Assembly, but for Londoners, then I think that's something that should happen.
We will do that, and like Emma said, the conversations do happen, but we can formalise them and we can make sure that there are clearer outcomes of those conversations that are shared with you. Definitely.
Yeah. Thanks, Chair.
Okay, we've reached the end for you anyway. We've still got a bit more to do. Members, can we note the report, but can we also thank our guests for their attendance and for the answers they've given?
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Feel free to leave if you wish. I'm sure you have other things you might want to do. Otherwise, you can stay if you like. Emma's got to stay. Ah, yes. Leah, you're free to go. I'm afraid, Emma, you're stuck here for a little while. Aren't you lucky?
Gareth, thank you.
Thank you very much. Right, item 7, members, is People's Question Time, which is taking place in October in Islington and will be chaired by Assemblymember Arnold. The report is tabled. Emma, did you want to speak to that?
Just to say that, yes, as you've stated, it's the 37th People's Question Time in the London Borough of Islington, which Jeanette will be chairing with much excitement. It's taking a long time, Jeanette, for you to get to the point where you're chairing in Islington, hasn't it?
I haven't chaired one for about 10 years.
No, I've never chaired
So
one.
it's finally...
You've never chaired one?
No, but it's all about the 38th People's Question Time. I think you're fine. Emma, back to you.
So we have we've consulted with Jeanette on both the venue and the date. We have identified the Islington Assembly Hall as an appropriate location for the event. So it has a capacity of up to 500 and has really good transport links. So obviously tube and bus links. So this seems to be the most appropriate date. I'm aware that the 23rd of October date is during school half term. We had a bit of a sort of perfect storm of challenges around diary dates and venue dates. But given that October half term doesn't feel like prime going on holiday period, I don't think it's going to have a huge impact on the audience. What we will do though in terms of the putting out advertising tickets is that we will make sure as we monitor that through that we're getting the right levels of take up and if necessary outweigh any advertising to make sure we've got a good strong audience for the event. So.
Okay. Members, is everyone content with that, or are there any suggestions we can add to improve People's Question Time, other than cancelling it? The acoustics
will be good.
The acoustics will be good, okay. So are we prepared to note those proposals? Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much, members. Okay, item 8, moving swiftly on, is action taken under delegated authority. Can we note the actions taken? Item 9 is the work programme for the committee. Do we note the report? Members, we're nearly done. Can we? Item 10 is dated for the next meeting, which is the 17th of October 2018, 10 o'clock in here. Item 11, any other business? There isn't any, so meeting is closed.